I went to New York when I was 17, and within a very short time I was editor of a poetry magazine, and also at that time television was just starting up. One of the first stations was WABD, and it was in the old Wanamaker building, which was a department store. And in the basement of the department store, they set up a very primitive television station. And everybody there in the station worked for nothing and very close to it, because television was very primitive and only a handful of people had TV sets. Well, I used to hang around there, and I was working on a newspaper, and I would hang around there in my spare time and watch how everything was going, and they finally started paying me $4 a week. So that was big salary in television. So I really was a pioneer in television. And here we all knew that television was going to be really big. But the Korean War started, and my natural patriotic instinct was to defend my country and become a big war hero. In other words, they caught me trying to cross the Canadian border. And they dragged me into the army. They shipped all the black guys to Korea, and they shipped all the white guys to Europe. And Europe was a pretty good place to go. We got our orders, which is a sheet of paper with nothing but gobbledygook on it. Unless you know what all these phrases and initials mean, you don't know where you're going and how you're going to get there and what they're going to do to you when you do get there. So our orders said we were going to the 7707 AFN company, and nobody knew what the hell that was. So I all figured out I'm going to be doing autopsies. So we arrived in Frankfurt, and all these soldiers got off the train, and there were fleets of trucks waiting for them. And they all climbed into the backs of the trucks. And we couldn't find our truck. George and I were running around saying, where the hell is the AFN company? And a limousine pulled up. Honest to God, a limousine pulled up, and a German driver got out. And the Germans in those days, they probably still do, they loved uniforms. This guy was wearing big boots and a big leather coat. And he said, is this Herr Keel? And I said, yeah, and he'd come for us. So we got into the limousine. All these other soldiers that we had ridden on the train with, they were pretty disgusted. So we got into the limousine. We started off going outside of Frankfurt. And we asked the driver, are we going to live in a tent? He said, no, you live in a castle. He pulled into a town called Herbst. And there was a bloody castle. And it was the Von Breuning Castle. Now, we had a system in those days, and the Army had a system, where, Germany was absolutely leveled, but anything that was standing, the U.S. Army took it. And they seized this castle and turned it into a radio station. That was what AFN stood for, was the American Forces Network. And we were suddenly, our basic training had been a terrible nightmare. And now we were suddenly living in luxury. And we had a maid who came in and made our beds and swept the floors and everything. And our cooks in the Army mess hall there didn't serve Army food. They traded it on the German black market for steaks and things. And they were very good cooks. They were carefully selected cooks. So George was assigned to the newsroom of the radio station. By the way, this is probably the biggest radio network in the world at that time. And I was assigned to production. And I was to produce radio shows. I knew a little bit about television, but I didn't know much about radio. So naturally, they made me a big shot there. Now, in 1951, I was doing a lot of shows. For example, we had a show called something like a Profile of a Leader. And we were supposed to do a program every week about one of the generals living in Europe. And And so they had the dullest biographies. You know, they went to this school and that school, and a few of them had been in an actual battle. And after a while, we got pretty fed up with these dull biographies, and we started inventing generals. And nobody ever caught on to us. And then from then on, every week you heard machine guns going, and the general saved his whole command. And nobody ever questioned us. And this station was heard all over Europe, and including England. When my 2 years in the Army was up, I had a big debate with myself. By this time I had a German girlfriend. Incidentally, because of the war, most of the young men our ages had been killed, German men had been killed in the war. And so there were like 35 or 40 girls our age to every German man. So the German girls had a problem. Well, we didn't. I started dating a girl who was the daughter of a judge in Hamburg. And of course, nobody in Germany at that time had been a Nazi. But you couldn't be a judge in Germany during the war years unless you were a Nazi. So I decided to take my discharge in Europe. And they offered me a civilian job with the radio station. Now I was really a big shot. I was a suit. And so I got out of the Army in Frankfurt. At that time in the United States, people were earning something like $40, $50 a week. And there I was getting $200 a week. Wow. And yeah, it was quite a difference. And I was gaining power all the time. They couldn't do without me. But after a year of that, now I had been in Germany 3 years. And Germany was then a very grim place. As I said, most of the cities were in ruins. And I decided, and this, you can only do this when you're 22 years old and make this kind of stupid decision. I decided to quit. And I said, I'm going back to Egypt. Because when I was in Egypt, I felt this strange kinship. Most people feel this when they go to Egypt. They feel that we have a link with ancient Egypt, not the modern Egyptians are converged. And so I went back, and I had all the press credentials in the world. And I interviewed Gamal Nasser like 4 times. He was then president of Egypt. And I went to many of the pyramids. I got lost in the desert and all. And of course, I didn't have much money. And I had an agent in New York who was supposed to sell my stories. But the problem was, he sold everything I wrote, but it would take a year to get the damn money. So there were many times when I was broke. But I had all these press credentials, so when money was getting thin, I would go, say, to the Aswan Dam or Luxor, and I'd check into the most expensive hotel. And because I had official Egyptian press cards, they would tear up the check when I left. And I rode on all the trains and things for free because I had these press cards. So I was turning into an expert freeloader. That was the secret, because in those days, the dollar was king. This movie is about 20 minutes long. It's very old and it's full of splices. And let's hope that it doesn't break anywhere. Knocking my head off. Still public? We're coming out with a limited soon. Where is it? This is in Cairo. These fellows are sitting in an outdoor cafe smoking their version of pop. It's called Hobbly Bobbly. I haven't seen this for a long time. The colors are completely gone. That's my German girlfriend, Lita. The book is dedicated to her. Nobody knows why. I mean, they didn't find anything. This is the entrance to one of those tiny pyramids. And here comes our hero now. I was wearing a necktie. In those days, everybody wore a necktie. I think I had a jacket too, but Rita was holding it while I was fooling around with my weight meter. I didn't think a lot of crap would be on that photograph. People must have spent years digging through those little pyramids, and then they didn't find anything. This is a street magician. Golly man. Some of them were very skillful, and usually they wore a turban because they would hide things in the hair in the turban. And they always wanted me to teach them card tricks. They had all these wonderful ancient tricks, and now they wanted to learn card tricks. That's a European trick. You must have bought that by mail. That's a bird, it's a toy bird. Shows you the empty basket. He's a real showman this guy.
Oh, special effects.
These are the miracles of mysterious bodies. A tree has grown there. Pretty dumb trick. That's a world famous magic trick, the mango tree trick. This is a trick that's thousands of years old. And it was very hard to find anybody who could do real ancient tricks. Cups and balls. Absolutely spellbinding. Oh, this is a snake charmer trick. If they think they've got a wealthy tourist watching them, they let the snake bite them. And then the tourist feels sorry for them and gives them big bucks. He let it bite him. They always did that to me. And I got a lot of snake charmers. I finally started telling them, please don't let it bite you. I'm not going to give you any more money for that. I did that with the flute. The cobra, you shake the flute and the cobra is trying to strike at the flute. Cobras can't hear. Snakes can't hear. So that's all showmanship when you see a snake charmer doing that. When I came back to New York, I had 3 cobras and a boa constrictor with me. And the publisher of the book moved me into a pet store, in the window of a pet store in Times Square. And every day at 3 o'clock I'd get in the window and charm the snake.
The things you do to flog books, right?
Yeah. Oh, thank God.
They have that shirt and tie, but what about Lita?
A story in itself. Lita and I were together for 7 years, and finally, I kept going away, traveling, and finally, I came back to New York and brought her over a few months later, and we did nothing but fight when we were in New York. And the 7-year relationship just fell apart. I watched Casablanca last night. Reminds me a lot. Lena and I have Cairo. Who wants it?